In the heart of Buckingham Palace, a question was asked, a simple question by a child, but what seemed innocent on the surface triggered an unprecedented crisis within the royal family. What was that question, and why did it send shockwaves through the monarchy? Stay with us to uncover the shocking secrets that have been buried for decades, even as royal advisors scrambled to shield Louis from the implications of his question. The ripples were already spreading through the family, through the staff, and deep within the walls of the palace. An old secret long buried began to stir once more. Years before her untimely death, Princess Diana had written a letter to her sons. It was a letter never meant for the public eye, but its contents would soon echo with chilling relevance. Diana had hinted at something deeply troubling within the royal bloodline, something her sons were never meant to know. At the time, the palace had dismissed it as emotional fallout from a broken marriage, but Louis's innocent question reignited those forgotten fears. The letter had been stored deep within the royal archives, sealed in a cream-colored envelope with Diana's delicate handwriting on it. For William and Harry, when the time is right. The time had never come to open it until now. After Louis's question, senior aides recalled the letter's existence, and in an effort to understand its full implications, it was retrieved. When those closest to the royal family read it, they were struck by the rawness and foresight of Diana's words. In time, a child will ask a question so simple, so innocent, that it will unravel more than anyone ever expected. The line seemed to have been written with unsettling clarity. How could she have known? Was it prophecy, or had Diana uncovered something years before that the monarchy had spent decades hiding? Behind the scenes, many had suspected that Diana harbored doubts about the legitimacy of certain branches of the royal family. But at the time, those suspicions had been dismissed as paranoid delusions. However, now Louis's question felt like a direct echo of those long-buried fears. Charles, still only Prince of Wales at the time, had fought relentlessly to suppress the letter's contents, fearing it would only complicate matters with his sons. But with Louis's question echoing through the palace, Charles's silence now felt more like a cover-up than a protective gesture. He had wanted to keep the boys away from the complexities of royal history, but now it seemed that the very history they were trying to shield had come back to haunt them. What shocked royal officials the most was a passage in the letter that referenced Louis and Charlotte long before either of them were born. If anything should happen to me, protect the little ones yet to come. Their truth may one day be questioned by those who claim to defend it. That passage, once thought to be a mother's wish for her children, now appeared prophetic. Diana's words were no longer just a painful reminder of her struggles, they had become an unsettling truth. As the royal staff worked feverishly to maintain control over the situation, the secrets of the past began to resurface. Could Diana have known something others did? Had she uncovered a truth that the royal family would rather keep hidden? And why, after all these years, had no one dared to explore what she might have known? The failure to address Diana's warnings felt like an oversight too large to ignore now. Her letter, once a painful artifact, was suddenly the key to truth that no one had been prepared to face. Inside the royal archives there was a file kept sealed under strict protocols and marked as level grey, reserved for documents deemed too dangerous to be shared openly. This file contained DNA reports, medical tests, and genetic studies related to the royal family, dating back to the early 1990s. The urgency with which the file was retrieved had nothing to do with the media or public relations. It had everything to do with the private and deeply personal fears of the royal family, fears that Louis's innocent question had stirred back into existence. What was inside that file would change everything. The contents confirmed suspicions that had long lingered in the shadows. Anomalies were found. DNA tests from various royal members didn't align with what was expected. Most troubling of all, the file contained notes that read, "Subject lineage presents deviation from expected paternal signature." The implications were clear. Somewhere deep within the family tree there was an individual who did not belong. The documents were vague, but the unsettling truth was unmistakable. This wasn't just a matter of technicalities, it was a matter of blood, of lineage, of the very identity of the monarchy itself. As the file was passed through various hands, royal advisors became increasingly alarmed by the extent of the discrepancies. What followed was a flurry of activity that took place behind closed doors. Senior advisors, top officials, and even members of the royal family themselves began to pore over the contents of the file. The documents, which had been sealed for decades, were now the focus of a crisis far greater than anyone had anticipated. The monarchy was faced with an uncomfortable reality. Louis's innocent question had forced them to confront a truth that had been hidden from the public for generations. The secrecy surrounding the royal bloodline, once thought to be unshakable, now seemed fragile. And the question that Louis had asked so simply and innocently had cracked open the door to a past that no one wanted to revisit. As the monarchy tried to regain control over the situation, one thing became abundantly clear: the legacy of the royal family would never be the same again. Even as royal advisors scrambled to protect Louis from the fallout of his innocent question, the ripples of his words spread far beyond the palace walls, through the family, the staff, and into the long-buried secrets of the monarchy itself. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a truth that had been hidden for decades, perhaps longer. An old, almost forgotten secret that had been carefully tucked away in the darkest corners of the royal archives began to stir once more. Years before her tragic death, Princess Diana had written a letter to her sons, one that was never meant to be read by anyone, let alone the public. In that letter, she had hinted at something deeply troubling, something wrong with how the royal bloodlines were being handled, something far darker than anyone could have imagined. For years, the palace had dismissed it as emotional fallout from a broken marriage, an unstable woman lashing out in pain. But Louis's innocent question, asked in the quiet of the rose garden at Balmoral, brought Diana's words rushing back with a chilling clarity that no one could ignore. The letter, hidden away deep within the royal archives, had been sealed in a cream-colored envelope, marked with Diana's elegant handwriting, "For William and Harry when the time is right." For years, it had been assumed that the time would never come, that the family would never need to confront the unsettling truths it contained. The letter was considered a relic of the past, an emotional expression from a woman who had long been out of the picture. The time had passed, and so it was locked away untouched. But now, with Louis's seemingly harmless question, that time had arrived. As the senior aides scrambled to piece together any connection between Louis's question and the secrets they had tried to bury, one of them recalled the letter. They retrieved it from the archives, and as it was opened and read aloud, a deep and unnatural silence fell across the room. Diana's words, written years ago, were raw, deeply personal, and hauntingly prescient. She had written, "In time, a little one will ask a big question, and that question will unravel more than the family ever prepared for." At the time, those words had been written in a moment of pain, perhaps in the heat of a broken heart, but now they felt like a prophecy. How could she have known? Was it a simple mother's intuition, or had she uncovered something long buried in the royal family's history that no one else had dared to face? Behind closed doors, it had always been understood that Diana harbored suspicions, that the bloodline within the House of Windsor was not as secure or as honest as it appeared to the public. She had never voiced those suspicions openly, but those who were closest to her, the few who had witnessed her vulnerabilities and shared her private moments, knew she had glimpsed something darker, something hidden beneath the surface. At the time, her comments were brushed off as the ramblings of a woman scorned, a mother reeling from the collapse of her marriage. But now, with Louis's question echoing through the halls of the palace, those seemingly paranoid musings took on a far more sinister and undeniable light. Diana had been right, perhaps more right than anyone could have imagined. Charles, still the Prince of Wales at the time, had fought tooth and nail to suppress the contents of the letter from ever being made public. He believed it would confuse the boys, stir up unnecessary rumors, and expose vulnerabilities that the family was not prepared to face. He argued that it would hurt them all, especially the children, to have to confront the painful and unspoken truths of their lineage. But now, in the aftermath of Louis's question, Charles's silence seemed less like protection and more like an attempt to avoid validation of a fear he had long buried. His defenders, once steadfast in their loyalty, now wondered if the real fear wasn't about causing confusion. It was about the fear of having to confront something that had always been lurking beneath the surface. What shocked the royal officials most, as they began to comb through the contents of the letter, was a chilling reference to two names, Louis and Charlotte, long before they were ever born. "If anything should happen to me, protect the little ones yet to come. Their truth may one day be questioned by those who claim to defend it." That passage, so seemingly benign at the time it was written, now appeared as if Diana had known something no one else did. How had she known? Had she foreseen that one day her grandchildren would ask a question that would reveal the truth they had all worked so hard to conceal? The realization hit hard. Diana's words were no longer just a sentimental note from a mother to her sons. They were a prescient warning of something far larger and more dangerous than anyone had realized. The more officials read and reread Diana's letter, the more it became clear that her suspicions about the royal family's bloodline were not just the rantings of a heartbroken woman. She had written with a sharp clarity, a cold foresight that no one could ignore. The letter wasn't a lament about her personal misfortunes. It was a warning about a deeply ingrained flaw in the family's very foundation, one that no amount of secrecy could fully shield. Diana had seen through the polished veneer of the royal family's legacy and had known, perhaps better than anyone, that something was deeply wrong. And now, Louis's question had brought those old truths back to the surface, forcing everyone to confront what they had tried to bury for so long. For the royal family, the letter was a devastating blow, not just because it referenced Louis and Charlotte, but because it exposed a level of fragility that no one had been willing to admit. The monarchy had always been portrayed as an unshakable institution, founded on tradition and continuity. But Diana's letter painted a very different picture, one of uncertainty, hidden doubts, and unanswered questions about the royal bloodline itself. It was no longer just a personal matter between Charles and Diana. It was a question of royal legitimacy, of who truly belonged and who might not. As the contents of the letter became known to a small circle within the palace, the weight of Diana's words began to take their toll. The fear, the anxiety, and the sense of impending crisis began to settle over everyone. But what truly shocked those within the inner circle of the monarchy was the reality that, for all their efforts to suppress the truth, they were now faced with the undeniable possibility that the very foundation of the royal family was far less secure than they had believed. What had once seemed like a matter of personal grief, a troubled marriage, had now evolved into a matter of national importance. The truth about the royal bloodline, once buried, could no longer be ignored. Charles's worst fears were beginning to materialize. His children, his heirs, were now at the center of a crisis that no one had anticipated. The monarchy, built on the fragile pillar of lineage, was being forced to confront its darkest secrets. And Louis's question, the one that no one had expected, the question that had come so innocently from the lips of a child, had cracked open a door that the palace had long hoped would stay closed. As the royal advisors and staff worked feverishly to contain the fallout, the true depth of the crisis began to unfold. Diana's letter was no longer a relic of the past. It had become a beacon that shone light on a truth too dangerous to ignore. And in the shadow of Louis's innocent question, the monarchy faced a reckoning it had long tried to avoid. What would come next, no one could say. But one thing was clear: the royal family's legacy would never be the same again. As panic quietly spread through the upper halls of Buckingham Palace, the weight of Louis's question began to settle, casting a long shadow over the entire royal establishment. Conversations that had long been sealed behind closed doors, hidden beneath layers of tradition and protocol, now surged to the surface, unbidden and impossible to ignore. Had Diana seen something in Charles's inner circle? Had she overheard a conversation she was never meant to hear? Why had no one pursued this thread after her death? The failure to heed her warnings now seemed like a catastrophic misstep, a ticking time bomb that had been allowed to quietly tick away, unnoticed for far too long. As whispers of doubt began to creep into the palace corridors, senior officials started asking discreet, nervous questions. Could the contents of that letter, which had been written to protect her sons, now have deeper implications for her grandson Louis? Was Louis's simple inquiry truly just a child's innocent curiosity, or was it something more? Had Diana foreseen that her warning would one day be triggered by something so small, so seemingly harmless? The very question Louis had asked, the one that had innocently disrupted the calm of the garden, was the question that Diana had always feared, a question capable of unraveling the carefully constructed narrative of the monarchy itself. But Diana's fears had not only been articulated in that prophetic letter. Behind the scenes, there was a darker and far more tangible thread of evidence that had been carefully concealed within the vaults of Windsor. Hidden behind 6 inches of reinforced steel was a file, its existence known to only a select few within the royal family. This file, sealed under Crown Emergency Protocol, was a repository of some of the most sensitive and potentially dangerous material in royal history. Its contents were a combination of DNA samples, cross-verified medical reports, and annotations made by private royal physicians. For years, few knew of its existence carefully guarded and buried beneath layers of secrecy. But after Louis's destabilizing question, a top aide was ordered to retrieve the file to see what it contained, and what he found would change everything. The file wasn't part of any normal registry. It wasn't included in the traditional royal records, and its classification was unlike anything else. The file was designated Level Grey, a classification reserved only for material deemed too volatile, too dangerous to be logged in the usual royal archives. The urgency surrounding the retrieval of this file was not driven by public or media pressure. It was driven by something far more terrifying: fear. If Diana had warned of a question, and Louis had asked it, the monarchy now needed to verify something they had buried for decades, the very bloodline upon which the royal family's legitimacy rested. As the aide painstakingly flipped through the thick stack of papers, what he found was more troubling than anyone could have anticipated. The file contained lab reports dating as far back as the late 1990s, alongside updated summaries from just a few years prior. The DNA samples were labeled with cryptic initials WHGCL, and as the aide examined the files, certain anomalies jumped off the pages. Multiple entries contained annotations such as non-alignment detected and mitochondrial inconsistency unresolved. But what truly set the aide's heart racing were the highlighted comments stating, "Subject lineage presents deviation from expected paternal signature." In simpler terms, it appeared that someone within the royal family, someone who had always been presented as a legitimate heir, might not actually be biologically related to the family at all. While the documents avoided naming names, the implications were unmistakable. The notes did not point to a singular individual, but rather they cast a long shadow across every name on the page, especially the youngest members of the royal family. The anomalies were so severe that even a former royal physician's name appeared frequently in the earlier reports, only to be completely redacted in later versions. The mystery deepened further when it was revealed that this file had been personally ordered into secure storage by none other than Lord Mountbatten's successor, the very man tasked with maintaining continuity and the royal family's legacy across generations. His involvement with this file only confirmed what many had long feared. This was no accident. The discrepancies in the bloodline were not the result of a simple mistake. They were part of a legacy-level cover-up, one that had been carefully orchestrated over the course of decades. This wasn't about protecting the royal family's reputation, it was about protecting its public faith. The truth about the royal bloodline had been deliberately concealed, buried beneath layers of secrecy to preserve the monarchy's image and ensure its survival. When the file was finally delivered to King Charles, aides recall the haunting silence that followed. He immediately dismissed everyone from the room, the weight of the discovery too much to bear in front of others. No meetings were scheduled for the rest of the day. For over 7 hours, Charles remained alone in his private study with nothing but the file, the devastating truth it contained, and the crushing weight of what it meant for the future of the monarchy. What was worse, however, was not just the contents of the file. It was who else would eventually see it, and what they would decide to do with the information. Camilla, upon hearing of the file's existence, was the second person to be shown its contents. Within minutes of reading it, she was seen in tears, visibly shaken by the revelations it contained. Desperately, she demanded that Charles end this madness before it consumes us all. The quiet concern that had once surrounded the discovery of the file quickly spiraled into emotional collapse. The stakes had shifted. Camilla, who had stood by Charles through decades of scandal, criticism, and public doubt, was now faced with a threat far greater than anything they had faced before. The contents of the Windsor file weren't just political or reputational. They weren't about the media or public perception. They were genetic in nature and buried beneath the implications was a threat far more terrifying than media backlash: the security of her children's future. That same night, Camilla allegedly delivered an ultimatum that stunned even the most hardened royal staff. "If you let this come out, I will walk and I'll take everything with me," she declared, her voice trembling with emotion. The gravity of her words could not be overstated. She was not just talking about walking away from Charles. She was talking about walking away from everything: the royal family, their shared history, and most crucially, their children's futures. What had begun as quiet concern over Louis's seemingly innocent question now threatened to consume the royal family. The discovery of the Windsor file and its contents had set off a chain reaction that no one had foreseen. Camilla's emotional collapse was just the beginning. The revelations contained within the file not only jeopardized the public image of the monarchy, but they threatened to shatter the very foundation upon which it had been built. The monarchy's future was now tied to a secret buried deep within its bloodline, a secret that once revealed could change everything. And the worst part, the truth was now out there. It was no longer just a matter of what had been concealed, it was a matter of what the royal family would do next. Those close to the Queen Consort say she was inconsolable. Her reaction wasn't theatrical or self-indulgent, it was raw, desperate, as if the very fabric of the world she had so carefully constructed had begun to unravel. When she read the discrepancies in the lineage, when the words on the page finally settled into her consciousness, she felt the weight of the crisis crash down on her. It wasn't just about Louis anymore. It wasn't even just about the monarchy. It was about survival, her children's survival, and the survival of the legacy she had married into. Camilla knew what the implications could mean. If the questions about Louis's bloodline were allowed to fester and spread, what was stopping them from reaching further? What was stopping them from turning their gaze to other members of the royal family? What would prevent these whispers from seeping into the very core of her own family, her own children, Tom and Laura? She knew the press, she knew how a single story, a single rumor could ignite a firestorm. The monarchy, built on centuries of tradition, had always relied on a carefully maintained public image, an image that was now in jeopardy. If the public ever began to question the legitimacy of the youngest generation of royals, if Louis's seemingly innocent question became a part of the national discourse, it wouldn't stop there. Camilla's family could easily become the next target. Her thoughts were consumed by one terrifying possibility after another. Tom, her eldest son from her first marriage, was already viewed by some with skepticism due to his connections to the royal family. Despite his non-royal status, he had always been seen as an outsider by the more traditionalist factions of the monarchy. And then there was Laura, her younger daughter, whose future seemed even more precarious now that the question of bloodline legitimacy hung over them all. If the monarchy's legitimacy could be questioned, could it be long before whispers about her own children spread like wildfire? In the silence of the room where she sat hunched over the file in disbelief, Camilla's mind raced. There had been rumors. Of course there had been rumors. The gossip that surrounded the royal family like a dark cloud, always present, always hovering. But this was different. This wasn't idle speculation. This wasn't a passing tabloid story. This was about the very foundation of the family's future. The Windsor file wasn't just filled with medical anomalies or strange DNA markers. It was filled with proof. Proof of deviations that threatened to cast a shadow on everything, from Charles's legitimacy as king to the place of every child born into the royal fold. What terrified her most was the fragility of it all. The monarchy, with its centuries of power and tradition, had always seemed like a fortress, impervious to the whims of public opinion. But now, with the truth laid bare in that file, the fortress felt more like a house of cards. One gust of wind, one well-placed whisper, and it could all come crashing down. But Camilla wasn't just afraid for her children, she was afraid for herself. How would her legacy be shaped by all this? How would history remember her? The queen consort, married to a king who might not even have the bloodline that his title demanded, might find herself forever tainted by these revelations. Her own position, once secure, was now in jeopardy. She had spent decades building a life beside Charles, standing by him through every scandal, every criticism, every misstep. But now the stakes were higher than ever before. If this secret came to light, it wouldn't just be a royal scandal, it would be a personal catastrophe. As her mind churned through these worst-case scenarios, she knew one thing for sure: the world needed to be kept from discovering the truth. The Windsor file couldn't be made public. If it were, everything would be lost. The monarchy, the family, her children, everything was on the line. The danger wasn't just external, it was internal. Those within the palace who knew about the file, who understood the ramifications of what it contained, had to be silenced, or at least controlled. The palace wasn't just dealing with a scandal. They were dealing with a crisis of identity. And so, in the midst of her despair, Camilla began to formulate a plan to protect her family, her children, and the legacy she had worked so hard to help secure. The path ahead would be fraught with peril, and she knew it, but there was no other choice. If the monarchy was going to survive this, if she and her children were going to have any future within it, the truth about the bloodline could never reach the public. With her resolve hardening, Camilla stood up, wiping the tears from her eyes. She knew what needed to be done. But she also knew that whatever steps she took next, whatever compromises she made, would shape the future of the royal family forever. The stakes had never been higher. Now, as the fate of the monarchy hangs in the balance, one thing is clear: there's more to this story than anyone could have imagined. Don't miss the next part of this unfolding drama. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon to stay updated on the shocking revelations that could change history forever. And if you think you know the truth about the royal family's bloodline, drop your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think will happen next? Could Louis's question be the beginning of the end for the monarchy? Let us know your thoughts.